Welcome to the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show. My name is Jeffrey Holst, and that
is Brian Leverage.
And we are going to talk about how to decide what repairs and renovations you should do for your real estate investments. We're going to do it right after this.
Welcome to the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show, where hosts Brian Leverage and Jeffrey Holst pour out old fashioned real estate advice.
And we're back.
All right, so before we begin talking about what to renovate and how to renovate, we're going to start by talking about the difference between renovation and repairs, because it is really important to understand that if there's something broken at your property, you have to fix it, right? Like that's just
Yes.
Right. There are landlords that allow people to have like leaky faucets or heaters that don't work, but we don't endorse that strategy. Like it may save you money in the short run, but it's not a good business
Costs you
strategy.
a lot more in the long run.
It's also morally incorrect. So we're not talking about repairs. We're going to talk about renovations. So having made that caveat, let's talk about how you decide whether it makes sense to do some kind of improvement to the property. So Brian, when you're thinking about whether or not to do an improvement, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Well, you want to look at what the cost is, and then you also want to look at the relationship to that cost versus the rent that you think you'll get by making those improvements. Additionally, there's also your longer term expenses, which are something you need to take a look at. An example of that just being hard surface flooring versus, say, carpet, right? Carpet's cheaper, typically about half the price of hard surface floors, like LVT, etc. And, but the thing is carpet might last a couple years depending on what your turnover is. People don't keep up with it. They typically don't even have it professionally cleaned, if they even vacuum it at all. And so you start realizing those cost savings down the line.
Right. So if it costs double as much for the hard surface, but it lasts 3 times as long, it's actually cheaper to do the hard surface than the carpet or other soft surfaces. And so that is one thing that you want to think about is like, what's the durability of the product that you're thinking about putting in? The same thing would apply to like granite countertops versus like regular traditional countertops. Those stone countertops tend to last a lot longer. They are more expensive though.
They are. They're aesthetically generally more pleasing as well, which might help. It might reduce your downtime on vacancies and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of intangibles that go into this.
So there's really 2 factors. So really what you're saying is the thing you want to look at is what does it cost and how is it going to impact my net operating income, not just today, but over the long term. And over the long term, not having to replace it as fast will help your net operating income. But also things like you said, like granite might reduce the turn time or turn costs. It might also command a rent premium. So you might actually have an increase of income and a decrease in costs and expenses associated with that. So the reason this is important is if you think back to the episode we did on capitalization rates, the higher your net operating income, the more valuable the property is. So if you put in, let's say, what do you typically think it costs to do granite?
We'll just say you're spending $10,000 on your overall renovation budget, right? And that could include, a whole host of things.
All right, yeah. So you're doing $10,000 with the renovation, and now you're getting let's just say you get an extra $100 a month in rent, right? So $1,200 a year. And for the purposes of simplicity, let's say that the cap rate's 10%. It's going to be lower than that in most markets. But if you had $1,200 a year in extra net operating income, it's not quite that simple because you'd have management fees and stuff. But if you did have a net increase of $1,200 a year at a 10 cap, you've produced $12,000 in value. So if you spend 10 and you get 12, I would say that's a good return. And in a lot of cases, I find that it's actually much more dramatic than that. Recently at a 12-unit building I had, we actually created individual laundry rooms at each unit. It cost me about $5,000 per unit to do that.
Yeah.
But I was able to get about $50 a month in extra rent on each unit, right? So I spent $6,000 doing all the laundry rooms, and I got an extra 50 times 12 or $600 a month, $7,200 a year, 7 cap market on the valuation. And I know that because I'm selling it. So I know what I'm getting. And it produces close to I mean, it's insane, actually. It's like $100,000 in extra value by spending $6,000.
Yeah, no, that's a great ROI.
Yeah, no, that one, I was okay with that. So when you're looking at whether or not to renovate something, I think that it makes a lot of sense to consider what the end result is going to be.
Well, in put a little more simply, another route you can go besides doing the capitalization approach to it is you can just simply look at, okay, what are the market rents versus what are your actual rents when you buy the thing? And let's assume it's not remodeled and in need of renovations. If the market will bear, say 1,000 and you're currently getting $700 a month in rent as is, that extra $300 a month for that same $10,000 in value, turns out to $3,600 a year, which is about a 36% ROI.
It's a really great. Yeah. It's a really great return, and that's kind of how I would look at it, right? Like, in my case, I got $7,200 extra rent for $6,000. Well, that's like more
Over
than 100%. Now, granted, there's a little cost to it, but that's like a significant difference. And a lot of times people don't do that. The previous owner of that property, I know because I know the guy that managed it for him, was told, you should do this, we can get more rent. And he was like, I don't want to spend $6,000.
Yeah. And I think the big takeaway too with some of this is it is important to control expenses. Yes, right. It's not all happening in a vacuum per se. But that being said, you can really impact your income side much more substantially by making those types of improvements.
This is a general rule in life, right? Like, it's a general rule in life. It's easier to make more money than to cut costs.
Yes.
And I do think too, let's just, before we wrap up the episode, I think it makes sense to talk about some examples of things that you can do, because I think that would bring real value to the audience. Yeah. So we already talked about hard surface versus soft surface floors, granite countertops or stone countertops versus non-stone, manufactured countertops. But there are lots of other factors to consider, like, should you put in reduced flow toilets, for example, or aerators? And the answer is probably. Yeah. I mean, that's another area where I've seen a lot of savings for a relatively small amount of cost. But what other things do you think about, like, when you're looking at renovating a unit? What kind of things are you looking at?
Well, with sort of LED lighting technology, the last 5-10 years, it's really improved quite a bit. So installing those in like your common area rooms, or even if you have shared common areas,
or if you're paying the utilities, then
number one, your tenants will typically appreciate that more. You as the owner are going to have lower, longer term expenses.
Lower expense on electricity, but also on like light bulb replacements.
Exactly. You're not having to change out bulbs, presumably, a couple times a year or something.
And also, it's worth noting that you potentially could get some kind of tax credits for that. And as long as we bring that up, maybe we'll have a quick word from our sponsor. And now a word from our sponsors. Who's sponsoring us today, Brian?
Well, we are, Jeff.
We are. How amazing. So we want to tell you about how you can save an enormous amount of money on your taxes, and how Brian and I have been able to eliminate our taxes entirely.
You guys need to learn about cost segregation, which you can do by going to our website, oldfashionedtaxsavings.com.
Yes, and if you go there and you fill out the form, you can get a free, no-cost benefit analysis that will show you how much money you can save and what it will take to do that. All right, welcome back. So now that you know everything there is to know about saving on your taxes, I like those guys that did that commercial, by the way. They seem like really solid guys. Anyway, so some other things that you could do is, like, when you're renovating a property, one thing I really like to do is to spruce up the bathrooms. And it turns out that you can usually get a really nice vanity for a reasonable price, and a new vanity and new sink makes a lot of difference in a bathroom.
Oh, it does.
And then another thing you can do is you can either put up a tub surround to sort of cover up, maybe less attractive older style tile, or you could do like a coating, like a resurfacing.
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to always opt to replace, right? Sometimes repair or refinish works just fine, and frankly does it at a fraction of the cost of what replacement would be.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily always, putting in a new tub shower, let's say, that's going to cost a couple $1,000 between plumbing and the and the products you're going to have to buy for it anyway. Whereas like doing a recoating, for instance, on that is going to run you $500-600 maybe.
Yeah, and actually in some cases will be more durable and last longer than replacing, because if you put in a new plastic tub, there's potential breakages issues and like staining issues and stuff, where some of those old school, like the way they made them back in the day,
they don't build them like that anymore.
It's not the same anymore. So resurfacing them can actually make them last a lot longer and look, frankly, as good or better than brand new in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and then something else that it doesn't necessarily add long term in the sense of reducing your expenses, but you kind of want to stay with what current trends are, right, from a design standpoint. So one of the ways you easily do that in multifamily is just with color schemes.
Yeah, because we've been in the beige apartments that everyone has, and if you want to get,
it's 2021, people.
Yeah.
Listen, do not paint beige.
Yeah, and when I was living in an apartment last, was a long time ago, my apartment was beige. This was in 2006, right? So 15 years ago when I was in law school and I lived in an apartment, it was beige. And then I'm assuming that apartment's not beige anymore. I'm just gonna guess, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, it doesn't seem like it would make that much difference, because on one hand you would look at it and say, well, I mean, it doesn't really necessarily impact your life, so why would you want to repaint to, like, say, maybe a gray or a white or something, whatever might be trendy in your market at the time. But the reason is people are naturally more attracted to things that seem up to date and modern, which means your turn times might be quicker. You might even get additional rent for it because it just looks nicer. Mm-hmm. And if things look nicer, people are willing to pay more. They feel more comfortable living there. Other areas that you could look at too that can bring a lot of value in an apartment community is adding some kind of community amenity. And it could even be something as simple as like repainting and reflooring your common areas, because everyone uses them. And so even though it's a relatively small amount of space, it helps.
High traffic.
Yeah,
it has a lot of wear.
Yeah, it has a lot of wear, but it also
it's the first thing they see.
It makes every person that walk in there feel better. Right.
Yeah.
So if everyone's walking through the lobby, and you put in some fancy amenities in the lobby, whatever it might be, those, when they get home, they feel more comfortable with that building. So,
and statistics show that roughly 70% of renters have some type of pet. That could be a dog, a cat, a goldfish, hamster.
That's an incredible statistic. I
It
didn't realize
is.
it was that high.
And so for our four-legged variety of pets, that's an opportunity to capture additional revenue. So having something like a small dog park for a cost of several $1,000s allows you to rent to a broader spectrum of people, assuming you're okay with that. There are risks, of course. But at the end of the day, if you can get pet rent, pet deposit, etc., that's going to have a substantial impact on your bottom line.
Yeah, and you mentioned that. I'm thinking back to when I did live in an apartment. One of the things that was most attractive to me about the property was that it had some like walking trails where people could walk their pets. So similar to what you're talking about. And we had Chihuahuas then, so we still have the same Chihuahua now. Actually, she's really old, but so we would walk her out in these trails, and that's one of the reasons we picked that property over another property. And so it's those little things on the margins that make a huge difference when you're deciding what kind of amenities to add, or what kind of renovations to do, or what kind of improvements to make. So with that, Brian, is there anything else you want to share?
Well, I think we've covered enough for today.
Sounds good to me. And make sure you join us next time on the Old Fashioned Real Estate.
Thanks for tuning in.